All right, everyone, thanks for coming out today. We are here because we're sharing information that continues the story of the death and homicide of Ismael Lopez. At the end of last year, we got a court to order the DeSoto County District Attorney's Office to release the entire contents of its MBI file. Notably, there are documents that aren't there. We don't have audio and video, which we think that they are in possession of. We have officer statements, and we have some charts and some diagrams that really call into serious question whether or not any story you've heard from any officer, any law enforcement officer, any attorney on behalf of the city of Southaven or DeSoto County could even make possible physical sense based on what we know. So today we just kind of wanted to walk you through what we've provided you, the things that we think are telling and important. Number one, it wasn't one GPS unit that took them to the wrong house. That's not what happened. And that's what we've been led to believe, that there was one lawfully executed GPS unit that took them to this property. That didn't happen. There was confusion amongst 3 different officers at the time that they decided to go to the Lopez home, and 2 of the officers didn't think that it was the right house. Yet they went anyway. Also, basic training is that even-numbered houses are on one side of the street, odd-numbered houses are on the other side of the street. It's common sense. Finally, one of the officers actually parked in front of the Pierman residence, and they were concerned that Pierman was going to see the lights and run. So there is no legitimate excuse, no confusion that any legitimately trained officer could have been on the Lopez premises at all. Move forward. Now we know that there was no knock and announce, that the members of the Southaven Police Department that were there that day did not identify themselves as police officers when they came on the premises. That's troubling for us as well. Ismael Lopez had no way of knowing that there was law enforcement on his property who shouldn't have been there in the first time. As a matter of fact, there was discussion about whether or not, well, if it's the wrong house, we'll just ask him what the right house is. It appears from the evidence that one officer fired one shot to kill a dog, and that the other officer reacted from that shot by blindly shooting into a door and killing Ismael Lopez. Mississippi Bureau of Investigation went ahead and did their investigation, and at its widest point with the bullet trajectories, at its widest point, this door could have been open 3 inches. 3 inches. Yet the officer's statement is somehow that there was someone with a gun leaning out, pointing the gun, refusing orders to drop the gun from the widest point at 3 inches. Even more telling is when the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation did their investigation on the 3rd shot, which is the fatal shot, the one shot that took Ismael Lopez in the back of the head. Mississippi Bureau of Investigations couldn't determine that the door was open at all, which is consistent with our findings that we announced before, that the shot that killed Ismael Lopez went through a shut door. Next, the distance between where the long arm or the rifle was found and Ismael Lopez cast serious doubts on this notion that Ismael Lopez is waving a firearm and posing instant threat to law enforcement officers because they couldn't see him because he was behind a door. And then, finally, when he took one bullet and died immediately to the back of the head, that head was 14 feet away from the door, 12 feet away from the firearm. And so it's a chilling but real question. If he ever held the firearm, Mississippi Bureau of Investigation helps us in that capacity as well with the report by saying that they couldn't find any forensic evidence linking Ismael Lopez to the firearm, meaning no fingerprint, no DNA, no blood spatter, no forensic evidence linking Ismael Lopez to holding that gun that night. And if he was, how is it the gun is here and he's dead over here with a shut door? So we want to share this information with the public. We want to invite amateur sleuths. We want to invite amateur detective. We want to invite law enforcement people. We want to invite anybody that has an opinion. We want to invite people to try to figure out what happened when you go through this report. We've provided to the news, look at the graphs prepared for by law enforcement, look at the statements offered by the police officers, look at everything, and come to your own conclusions about whether any of the statements are consistent with undeniable facts. I would suggest that they do not comport with any of the facts espoused in the statements by the police officers. So we're asking for help in our detective. We're comfortable now with where we are. We are prepared to move forward in action against the city of Southaven and the officers individually. We think that we have all the evidence that we need to show that this is an incredible, unbelievable tragedy where a man got shot through a closed door 12 feet away from the door in the back of the head and died. And that's just what happened. So we'll be moving forward. I know Mr. Negley had a couple of comments on the process and procedures when we anticipate filing lawsuits.
Does anyone have any questions first for what Murray brought up?
Well, I do want to ask, does this speak to negligence on the officer's part as well as negligence maybe from DA John Champion's office?
Let me take the second part first. With respect to John Champion's office, I don't understand what happened there. I don't understand how this was presented to a grand jury. I don't know the format that it was given to a grand jury and how any grand jury could reasonably conclude that this was a good shooting in a line of duty by an officer. I don't know what was presented, but they weren't presented with any explanation of the facts versus the statements to not issue an indictment. So on John Champion, I don't know. I don't know what they did. With respect to the police department, there are a couple of things that we see as glaring issues. With the department as a whole, how you send somebody to the wrong address, how you haven't trained or properly trained your officers to just show up on somebody's property. And let's not forget, when you get in the report, they've been to that property before, right? Because people stole things from Ismael Lopez. He'd been a victim in the past, and the police had to come out and deal with it. So that's a policy problem. That's a larger issue. If you can't train your officers to come after a suspect at the right house, you are inviting violence against people that are not involved and should never have contact with law enforcement. That's a problem. The bigger problem is the idea that law enforcement can go guns a-blazing through a door, a closed door, before they can assess what the real situation is chilling to me. Because it could have been somebody in a sick bed or a wheelchair or a child or a mother, or it could have been a hardworking man who was a mechanic who was going back to protect his wife and got shot in the back of the head. Any sorts of horrible things happen when you shoot through a door when you don't know who lives there. And that's what happened. So, yes, I think there's a series of actions that negligence is one way to describe it.
Two questions that I have is, one, was there a language barrier? Do you know from speaking with Mr. Lopez's wife how fluent he was in English, or if that was truly his second language, that he would not have heard the officers saying, put your gun down, once this escalated to that point?
Well, let's remember, we have a neighbor that was right there that heard everything. He never heard the officers put your gun down. He heard knock, 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 and then pop, pop, pop. That's it. Mr. Lopez does speak English. It was obviously his second language. He was from Mexico, born and raised there, and moved to America, I think, when he was about 21. But yeah, he spoke English. I mean, he worked for the city of Bartlett. He worked in the city of Southaven. He spoke English perfectly fine. He would have understood any commands that were given to him, but no commands were given to him. There was knocking on the door, and then there was shooting.
We think the reason that there was no command to put the gun down is because we don't think he ever held the gun. We think that there was firing through an open door, and it was fortuitous at some point for the Southaven Police Department to identify a weapon to be able to get the story about what happened.
And then the second question I had was, in Officer Mace's transcribed statement, toward the very end, once Officer Mays and, is it Durden, is that the correct
Correct. Zachary
pronunciation?
Durden was the shooter.
Once Officer Durden has been removed from the home following this shooting, it says Officer Long then grabbed the suspect by the feet and pulled him backwards toward the door so they could render more aid. How does that affect, that he was this far away from the door?
Well, obviously they put him closer to the door. When we went there and we measured it at the center of where his head was, where you saw the brain matter, where you saw the blood, where you saw the brain fluids leaking out where they shot him in the back of the head. So that's where we measured. They never cleaned up the mess. We came there. We had to clean up the mess. We had to send service masters there to clean it up. So yes, we measured it. His head was 14 feet away from the door. And pictures of that was provided to all of you at another press conference with the measuring tape.
So, I mean, obviously the grand jury's already made the decline to indict. Is the civil case really the last chance at justice? Can the grand jury reconsider this case based on this report? Where do we kind of go from here?
Well, John Champion had the report when he presented to the grand jury, so I think it's unlikely that he's going to learn some new facts. We're happy to work with him. Part of what we'll have to do in the lawsuit are to hire experts with respect to policy, procedure, wrongful shootings, how you get to the right address. So we'll have experts. And so it may be that we can provide him something that he missed before, and it may change his mind. I don't know. If he has new evidence, maybe he would consider an indictment. But yes, that leaves us with a very tough, civil cases are tough, fight for justice for Lopez, and that's where we're going to be. And we're going to get the opportunity to sit across a table from Mays and from Durden and from the chief of police. And we're going to have the opportunity to ask them questions and walk them down the line and make sure they've given us everything and walk through what the policies are. And that's what this litigation will give us. So we'll start that process now.
Why did it take so long for you to get what you have now? What do you think that says about this?
I don't understand it. We'd asked for it for a long time. I went down and had a personal conversation with John Champion about it. He told me that as soon as he received a subpoena, he would give it to us. Just give me a subpoena. We got him a subpoena. He still refused to produce the information. We had to go back to a judge and get the judge to order the district attorney to turn over the files. And then, I think the day before the deadline he had, we got him. What does it say about it? I don't think they want the story out. I think that when you look at the facts versus the statements, I think it's damning. And I think the longer it takes to get that story out, hopefully, for their perspective, the story, something else has replaced it. And then it's gone in the midst of the news cycle. And it's our job to make sure that doesn't happen.
Do you know if this door was
Luke,
showed?
I'll say something a little bit more about that. I think it says everything. It says they have everything to hide. They have every reason to try to bury this. They have every reason to try to protect their officers, because when we release this to all of you, we want the public to read it to see that everything has been hidden, that these officers murdered Ishmael Lopez, that these officers did not conform to their duties to protect and serve. I mean, it says everything to me. So.
Do we know if this door was shown to the grand jury?
We know it wasn't shown to the grand jury because, like the mess they left when the Mississippi Bureau investigation left the premises to the grieving widow, also the door was left. They took a piece of railing where a bullet went into, but otherwise the door was left. And so we went and bought a new door so the Lopez family didn't have to walk through a bullet-ridden door on the way to their house where their husband and their father was murdered. So we know they didn't see the door because it's in our custody and has been since we replaced it on behalf of the Lopez family.
But you don't know if the report was shown in the grand jury?
We don't know what was shown. I think at some point John Champion made a statement. I gave them the Mississippi Bureau investigation report. So I don't know if that means here, make a decision, or here we think there's probable cause for manslaughter or reckless homicide or voluntary or negligent homicide. just handing somebody a report, a group of grand jurors, is a very tough thing. There has to be a presentation of a case, or else the grand jury can't really do anything. And in this case, I don't know that a prepared presentation, because also you'll remember John Champion's approach to this was kind of, well, I mean, I just kind of let the jury decide what they wanted to do. That's not consistent with grand jury proceedings that I'm aware of as a former prosecutor and as a criminal defense lawyer. That it doesn't work that way. The district attorney has made a decision to bring charges against someone and presents it to the grand jury to see whether or not they'll indict on the charges that they believe fit the facts. That's how it goes. In this case, we got something a little different. We just kind of threw it up there and they could do whatever they wanted, from second degree on down. And they decided not to do it.
Aaron and Murray, how big is that window on
Looks like about 3 inches by 2 feet.
The window is probably larger than the door was ever opened.
So I'm looking at this file right now and this statement from the officer. It says, "I can see the barrel of the rifle pointed in Officer Durden's direction." So, in your view, that's completely not.
That's completely false.
We don't, just the physics, just the physical evidence. If you believe what the bullet hole suggests, that's where we went immediately, was to run line patterns to figure out what angles the bullet went in versus where we knew Durden was. I don't know how, because of the way the door opened, he could get out there and even get the thing out there. I just think it's physically impossible for that statement to be consistent with factual.
Let's not forget the couch was literally right next to the door. So for that to actually happen, he would have been standing on the couch. Again, that's factually impossible.
The door opens this way. The couch is right here. So Durden's here. So if the door to open 3-inch, and then for Ismael Lopez to get in this 3-inch window at night with a clear view of Durden, at the same time that Mays is shooting a pit bull, seems incredulous at best. And then the amount of time it would take for Ismael Lopez to close the door and turn around and leave at least 8 feet to take that bullet in the back of the head is another really chilling part of this.
What's the process for the filing of the civil case moving forward?
The complaint has largely been prepared, meaning the charging document that we're going to bring has been prepared for some period of time. We wanted to get this document and spend some time with it. Now that we have it, we don't think we're going to get any more information from them, and we don't get the sense, and I don't know, that this is something that Southaven wants to kumbaya with us about. I think there's a wonderful opportunity in cases like this, and we always encourage it to use it as a tragedy that turns into an instructive tool for police officers and for citizens, and it can be a wonderful opportunity to bring resolution to a family and closure, and it can be a wonderful opportunity for a police department to send a message that, oh my God, we care about our citizens, we care about our residents. This is a terrible accident, a terrible tragedy. I don't care what word they use. I don't care that they admit fault, but admit it happened and admit we're never going to let this happen again. This is never going to happen because we love our citizens. And so we're always going to make sure we're at the right place. We're never going to rush to judgment. And we're using this to make sure it doesn't happen in honor of Ismael Lopez, one of our citizens that we lost. We've been offering that opportunity for a long time, and it's frustrating that nobody seems to want to take that opportunity because apparently I think they're scared of the lawsuit, but why not be human about it?
In short, you're calling this a botched investigation all around?
I think the investigation by the MBI spoke to a botched, immediate investigation. I'm not discrediting the investigation done by the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation. They appear to have come in and done a fairly thorough analysis. All their graphs, their measurements speak to our theory that we've had for a long time. So this is not throughout a botched investigation. I have very serious questions about the investigative techniques by the police department immediately following the shooting. and I have serious questions about whether or not this is an accidental shooting and a cover-up, and that the gun was conveniently used as a part of a cover-up to explain why a relatively young officer went blazing through a closed door. I have lots of questions about that.
And in your own investigation, have you guys gone back out to Surrey Lane at night to try and figure out where this house was compared to the other house that they were supposed to be in? They were talking about in that report, well, we couldn't really see the numbers. They seemed to be going down, but, you know, it just kind of made the assumption and knock and see if we're at the right place. Was it clear at night when you guys went out there to investigate?
It is clear at night for a non-professional, for someone who isn't called. I guarantee you that there was never a pizza delivered to Ismael Lopez's house meant for Mr. Pearson. Okay, nobody showed up with a pizza at the wrong house because it's simple. The numbers, they're on the different side of the street. One's even, one's odd. Pearman's house had the numbers on the house, not in a mailbox row along the street that made it so hard for us to figure out where it was. There was a disagreement on the site between 3 officers about whether or not they were at the right house.
I wanted to ask, was that a new revelation for you guys once you got this report? Were you hearing bits and pieces of that when you began your investigation?
The stories we'd learned and sort of gleaned from the limited information that was put out by the district attorney and by the Southaven Police Department was that one officer, that there was one device that was sent into the wrong house. And then that sort of filtered into this idea, well, also it was tough to see because there were a row of mailboxes on that street. So we sort of knew, but what we didn't know, what we did learn, was that all 3 officers disagreed about whether or not they were at the right house before trespassing on the Ismael Lopez property and taking his life.
So they use GPS. What kind of GPS? In the cars or on the phone?
I think their handheld GPSs is what they're using.
I think it was a Garmin GPS.
And so do you anticipate the people involved in this, on the other side of this complaint, will be the 2 officers and the Southaven Police Department, the city of Southaven?
Yes, that's right. We don't expect any action against the DeSoto County District Attorney's Office. We don't think that they have any legal liability for what happened that night.
And you expect you'll officially file that within a month, couple of months?
It would be surprising to me if there's not a lawsuit filed within the next 3 weeks.
Why not before now, the lawsuit? You wanted to wait until you had all of that.
We want to make sure the story we're telling is accurate, and that our lawsuit speaks to the truth, because we think that Ismael Lopez and his family deserve that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you all for
Thanks, guys.
coming.